You're listening to the VMO Show. I'm your guest host, Stacy Harbaugh. You may recognize my voice from Polka Time with DJ Shotsky on Sunday and Saturday nights at 7 p.m. on WVMO. But for my day job, I work for River Alliance of Wisconsin, where we advocate for the protection of Wisconsin's clean water resources. Now, I get to meet the coolest water experts in my work, just like today's VMO Show guest, who has deep experience with studying geosciences and hydrogeology. I'm joined today by Sue Swanson, who leads the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. Sue has an incredible background in applied research that she's bringing to this branch of UW Extension that has served our state for over 125 years. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have a conversation about, where our water comes from in Wisconsin. So tell me more about yourself and tell us about the mission and work of the survey.
All right. Well, I'm the director of the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. I'm also the State Geologist of Wisconsin. The State Geological Survey is part of UW-Madison Division of Extension, and our mission is really to provide education, outreach, applied research activities around the geology, mineral, and water resources of the state.
So you're like rock and water nerds.
We are.
In all the best ways. Well, in order to appreciate our water, we need to know where it comes from. And, Wisconsin is it's such a water-rich state. We know that we love being amongst the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. And, but those are the big surface waters. You really look at what's underneath the surface of our land to figure out how this land and water interact with each other.
That's right. So in Wisconsin, surface waters and groundwater are interconnected. But the State Geological Survey does focus more on groundwater. And as you said, Wisconsin is water rich, and we have some of the most prolific aquifers around. And so we're very lucky for that reason. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to effectively manage our water use and our land use practices so that we maintain high water quality.
The first step is just knowing what's out there and getting that information. So we know that the work of the survey is so valuable. But also something I'd like to bring attention to that's, I think, notable is that you are the first woman to hold that position as the state geologist. Tell us more about how that's come out in your work. Have you met any young women who are in STEM or what does it feel like to be the first woman in that job?
Yeah, thanks for recognizing that. I will point out that the State Geological Survey did have a woman director for a couple of months as an interim director. So there's that. But yes, I'm the first state geologist, and it's been great. I've had a number of young women in STEM reach out to me with questions. If I can serve as a role model for women in STEM, I'm happy to do that. As I went through college and the earlier part of my career, I had a lot of colleagues, right, that were women, but I can remember the first time I met a woman geologist in college. And then, even though I worked professionally before going to graduate school, it was about 5 years before I met another woman geologist. Things have changed a lot, right? So there's lots of wonderful role models out there. But if I can promote women in science, I'm happy to do so.
Thanks for listening to the VMO Show. I'm your guest host, Stacy Harbaugh, and I'm speaking with the new director of the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey, Sue Swanson. So Sue, in Wisconsin, I'm assuming that our drinking water really pretty much all comes from underground in one way or another. I mean, even if you're on municipal water, like they draw water from wells, right? So here in Monona, the city is located on the Yahara chain of lakes, which sits amidst urban life, farmland, lots of parks, and obviously our beautiful lakes. So I think that our drinking water is reasonably safe, but our lakes still have algae. We're really facing some complex water issues in our area, just like all across the state of Wisconsin. So I'd like for you to explain to us a little bit more about how all of this water is connected and what that has to do with where we get our drinking water from.
Yeah, great question. So I think one thing that's important to remember is that all groundwater in Wisconsin originally comes from precipitation. And I think it can be helpful to think about where groundwater originates before you start thinking about its relationship to something like the Yahara Lakes. So precipitation falls on the landscape. Some of it might run off. Some of it might infiltrate through the soil profile. Some of it might evaporate or get used by plants. But the rest of the water that actually makes it down to the water table is what we call groundwater recharge. So that's how aquifers get replenished, right? And then once that groundwater is in an aquifer, it doesn't just sit there. It flows. But it flows pretty slowly, okay? Much slower than surface waters. But eventually it flows through an aquifer system, and unless it gets intercepted by something like a pumping well, then it might flow to a lake, a river, or a wetland. And we call that groundwater discharge. So that's sort of the cycle, right? And it's really helpful to understand that before you start thinking about what can influence the quality of the water.
Yeah. And not all of that land across Wisconsin is all equal. I mean, we have a lot of diverse landscapes, both on the top and below. And so I think that some of our soils are going to handle water in different ways in different parts of the state. So some places are a little more sensitive to that rain that comes through and what goes on the land. Do you have some examples of how things are different around the state?
Yeah. So in and around the Madison and Monona area, most of the landscape, not all of it, has been glaciated. So there's a lot of loose material at the surface, sand and gravel, silt and clay, and water infiltrates down through the pore spaces in that material before it gets to the water table, like I explained. But in other areas of the state, like northeastern Wisconsin, the glacial cover is very thin, and the bedrock, made up of dolomite and limestone, is very close to the surface, and it's heavily fractured. So that recharge process still happens like I explained, but the rate at which it happens can be much faster than what it might be in an area like southern Wisconsin that has a thicker glacial cover.
Yeah, so that land's a lot more sensitive, I think.
That's right, more vulnerable.
Yeah, more vulnerable there. So, clearly how we protect our water and how we manage our water is going to be, we're going to have different strategies all over the state. But it's important to understand, how this water moves through the ground first. Like understanding that is really the first step.
That's right. Yeah, I think it has to do with an understanding of the geology and the land use practices. They go hand in hand to better understand the quality of the water in our aquifers.
Oh, man, that's so cool. All right, well, we're going to take one more quick break to listen to some music that I think you'll like, and we'll come back to talk a little bit more about what you can do in your household, but what we can do collectively to protect our drinking water. Thanks for tuning in to the VMO Show. I'm Stacy Harbaugh, here with a leader in Wisconsin's research in hydrogeology, Sue Swanson. So, Sue, I think that protecting our water can be pretty complex, but we can all do our part. Like here in the city of Monona, we have an Adopt a Drain program where residents can pledge to keep leaves and other debris out of the street drains, which ultimately flow into Lake Monona. So while that's a good program for an individual household, I'm wondering if in your work you have thought of some other ways that we can individually or collectively take care of our water and, understand how this all works. So what do you think?
Yeah, the programs that you mentioned, those are really important. And I'll point out that, oftentimes our focus tends to be on these surface water features, lakes, wetlands, that are so important to us, right? So those types of programs really have an important impact on the surface water features. But it might be that an area pretty far away from the lakes or the wetlands, that because of the geology, the land use practices in those areas are also really important. So we can't lose sight of the entire watershed when we are trying to protect resources like the Yahara Lakes.
Well, and, I think that something else that's very interesting is that when it comes to some of our collective decisions, like government decisions, we have these kind of, they seem arbitrary lines of counties and cities, but water doesn't respect any of those lines. But it might be a little different here in Dane County.
That's right. This area is pretty unique in that, as you said, watershed boundaries and political boundaries don't necessarily coincide. But the Yahara watershed actually coincides pretty well with Dane County. So not all of the watershed is within Dane County, but the majority of it is. And that provides really pretty unique opportunities for local government, county government to really think critically about the water resources and then the land use planning or zoning that gets done can have a really tangible impact on the resources that are so important to people in this area.
Oh, that's so cool. And, at River Alliance of Wisconsin, we talk a lot about how we should be managing water and planning for water based on the whole watershed, this whole basin where water moves together rather than in some of these arbitrary, county lines, or we can get the counties talking to each other for sure. But all of these collective decisions, add up to the quality of the water that we have here in Wisconsin. So tell us more how people can learn more about how water and land works and what kind of resources you have at the survey.
Great. Yeah, because that's really what the survey is there for. We're there to provide information about the geology, mineral, and water resources of the state for informed decision making. And so if you go to our website, you'll find that there are videos, blogs, and a lot of maps with explanations on the geology of the region. And I think really one of the most important things that people can do is to educate themselves on our natural resources so that they are informed when they go to make comments on new policy or zoning that might be coming up.
Well, if you love maps, please check out the website of the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. You don't even have to be as deep into the research as you are, Sue, to enjoy all of the maps that come out from the survey that just show how beautiful and interconnected Wisconsin really is.
That's right. Yeah, one of the maps that we produce pretty regularly at the Geological Survey is a groundwater contamination susceptibility map. Lots of big words there. But these maps take into account things like the geology, right? So either the loose glacial materials or the bedrock in a region, how deep the water table is, how deep the bedrock is, and how quickly groundwater recharges. And those maps can be used generally then to better understand the vulnerability of an aquifer to a variety of different land use practices. So I would point listeners specifically to those types of resources if they are interested in educating themselves on how to protect our water resources.
I love it. I love the maps. I love the information. You're doing an invaluable service over there. So we're so glad that you could join us today on the VMO Show. Sue, any final words?
Just thank you again. And hopefully people will find the information they need at the survey. But if not, please reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions too.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership and for your research.
Thanks.
Thank you.